This podcast is brought to you by Radio 786.
South Africa's informal economy plays a vital role in sustaining livelihoods and local markets, yet it remains largely overlooked in economic policymaking. Despite contributing significantly to employment and everyday economic activity, informal traders often operate on the margins of formal support systems. Current policies tend to prioritise the formal sector, leaving informal workers exposed to instability, regulatory uncertainty, and inadequate infrastructure. To discuss this, we are joined by senior researcher at the Southern Centre for Inequality Studies at Wits University, Dr. David Francis. He has been part of labour market economists investigating the concept of an economic policy for informal workers. Good afternoon, Dr. David, and welcome to the Soundbite.
Hi, hello. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you with us, Doctor. Could you define an informal trader? Who are we actually referring to? Is it just the people that we see on markets or people selling fruit and veg?
Exactly. So these are the traders who you see mostly in urban areas, but also in rural areas, trading and sometimes in demarcated slots and stalls in markets, but also often on the side of the road. And what makes them informal is that they're not registered businesses with the business registry, or the revenue services, and they don't pay VAT. So these are small, often one or two person businesses that are, making some money by selling goods or food and sometimes providing services like hair care and that kind of thing.
To paint a picture of informal traders and their role within society, what is their contribution to the economy, the sustaining of livelihoods, and then also job creation?
On the contribution to the economy, they, because they're small in overall GDP terms, they're often easy to overlook. But for people who are down in a busy city centre, they play a key role in providing goods and services that are affordable and easy to access. So, you can get off a bus or off the train or a taxi. You're walking to your office or your place of work and you can buy some fruit or a packet of chips or, something really easily in a small amount in a place that wouldn't otherwise, have a large supermarket or something else that you can buy. Or you can get your hair cut or styled, again, on the side of the road cheaply and quickly. So for consumers, they play an important role in bringing, goods and services that people want to where people are moving about on a day-to-day basis. And on the livelihood side, these businesses play a key role in bringing income and providing employment to people who, otherwise, given South Africa's really high unemployment level, wouldn't have any access to a way that they could earn a living. So it's a really important part of the inner city economy in many places.
Let's take a look at South Africa's economic policy. It does tend to prioritize the formal sector over informal traders or the informal economy.
Exactly. So, if we think about very high-level macroeconomic policy at the national level, it says very, very little about supporting the informal economy. And that's largely because, in many ways, the informal economy is seen by policymakers as something that we want to eradicate. We want everyone to have a formal job. We want everyone to shop at a formal supermarket. And so policymaking is often blind to this. But the reality is that South Africa has an informal sector. There's a demand for it and there's a need for it. And so if we just pretend it's not there or try and regulate it away, we miss out on ways that we could support and enable this. If we look at competition policy that regulates which shops can function, whether you can build a mall here, what tenants you can have in the mall, those are all things that are concerned with the formal economy and not the informal economy. And time again, we see, for example, that the informal traders will be trading in an area, a new shiny mall is built nearby, and all the informal traders are cleared away and they lose their livelihoods and everyone goes and shops at the mall instead. If it was the formal sector, that wouldn't be allowed under the kind of competition regulation policy, but that often happens with informal traders. And that filters down. What we've noticed in our research, and it's been widely publicized elsewhere as well, is that often local municipalities, who are the arm of the state that is most closely in contact with informal traders, see traders as a nuisance that need to be controlled, regulated, and organized. And that's the kind of language that you hear when you speak to often to municipal officials, rather than asking how informal trading can be nurtured and grown and supported and enabled. So it's seen as, well, if you must trade at all, it must be only in very specific demarcated places. You're not allowed to trade anywhere on the streets. We see lots of punitive action by local law enforcement, confiscating people's goods, chasing people away. And, I understand there's tensions here. You need to keep cities clean and you need to keep walkways clear. But our argument in developing this economic policy is that we need to design the policy for the cities that we actually have, not for cities that we want to look like Zurich or, some European capital, but a city in a growing, developing economy. And when you look at some of our neighboring countries or countries like India, they have a far larger informal sector, lots of very vibrant informal trade that's creating lots of jobs and bringing income for people. And so that's why we're making this argument that we need to develop a policy that's realistic about the stage of development we are and the kind of country we are, rather than trying to have, pristinely clean streets. But that means that we're taking away people's livelihoods.
What has your research revealed about the everyday realities faced by some of these informal traders?
So we did some concentrated research in the 3 metros in Gauteng, and the findings are that it's a very tough environment to trade in. For example, the city of Johannesburg has for years not had a functioning permit system. Since Operation Clean Sweep in about 2013, the permit system hasn't worked. They're only now piloting a new permit system, which means that any informal traders that you see on municipal land in the inner city in Joburg are trading illegally, because there's no way for them to get a legal permit, which means that they're open to harassment from law officials. Sometimes, it's enforcing the law and chasing people away. Often it's extorting bribes. There's very high levels of crime. As we know, the inner cities are not necessarily very well policed, so the traders are, subject to crime and criminal activity. And then there's just the reality of working on a street. You're exposed to the elements, the rain, the cold, the sun. Part of the argument we advance in our economic policy for informal traders is that cities really need to provide infrastructure. So if you're trading on the street in Johannesburg, you don't have somewhere to lock your goods at night, you don't have a toilet to use, you don't have fresh water. And our argument is that just like we provide roads for businesses and waterborne sewage for new housing developments, cities and the state need to provide infrastructure for traders. They need to provide safe place for traders to lock their goods up at night. They need to provide visible policing to keep traders safe. They need to provide sanitation services and that kind of thing. So, to help people trade in a way that's not harmful to their health. So it's our research shows it's tough, and the informal traders often are in a conflictual relationship with the various levels of government. There's some exceptions to that, but it's often a difficult relationship that they're dealing with.
You've mentioned some of the barriers created for informal settlements. We have the Greenpoint traders, for example, in Cape Town, where we've seen these former informal traders being shifted or their trade cancelled to accommodate events instead of incorporating them into those events.
Exactly. So I'm not super familiar with what's going on in Cape Town particularly, but this is, again, what we see time and time again. Informal traders are, begrudgingly allowed to trade, but then whenever they're seen as a nuisance, they are cleared away. And, an episode that highlighted that very starkly, you may remember back in 2020 when we had the first lockdown, you were only allowed to provide essential goods and services, but all informal traders were prohibited from trading, whereas they are providing essential goods and services. Many informal traders are trading in food and essential goods, but shops were allowed to stay open. But, the traders were all cleared off the streets for 3 or 4 weeks until that was changed. So what you're describing in Cape Town doesn't surprise me. The interests of our economic policy seem to be in protecting the formal sector, whereas when we have an event, we should be allowing informal traders to trade and make a livelihood. And, in that, I think we can learn a lot from our compatriots in other developing countries. If you go to Brazil, there's, thriving informal trade on the beach, even with credit card machines. You can buy a drink or an ice cream sitting on the beach, someone will sell it to you. Whereas, in South Africa, that's much, much less likely to happen anywhere.
When it comes to the macroeconomic instability, specifically impacting people working in the informal economy, how does it affect their day-to-day lives?
So I think, one of the key ways that happens is through inflation. So, we think about inflation affecting, bank balances and retirement savings and things. But if you think about the type of goods, especially for the food goods that are traded by informal traders, they're very, very susceptible to inflation, and they, the price increases. The goods are often quite elastic. So, a small price increase can mean a significantly lower amount of goods saved. And, if we think now this global macroeconomic shock caused by what's going on in the Gulf, that translates into high diesel prices, which translates directly into high food prices. And if all you're trading is food, you're buffeted very much by those macroeconomic headwinds in a way that people, you don't equate an informal trade on a street corner to being part of the macroeconomic climate, but they're actually very intrinsically linked, compared to, say, a big supermarket that has a much more diverse range of goods and a much bigger ability to absorb cost increases and moderate. As an informal trader, you have to just pass those cost increases through. So fuel price increases, inflation increases, those all very directly impact the livelihoods of informal traders.
And what practical policy changes would you prioritize to include informal traders in the system and to better support and grow the informal economy?
So I think the first thing is a change of mindset about what the role of the informal economy is, and to acknowledge that it's a key part of our economy and it needs to be supported. And if we can do that, then I think things cascade through. What I would say is, part of what makes this debate complicated is that we're not saying that an informal job is the best kind of job at all. Obviously what we want for everyone as policymakers and economists is decent, formal, stable employment. So that's the goal. That's what we really want to get everyone to. But in South Africa, we have to face the reality that, we all know our unemployment statistics are 35%, that the informal economy here, like in many developing countries, does have a role to play. It might be a transient role as, hopefully we move towards more formal employment. But pretending or hoping and wishing it away is not the solution. So I think if we acknowledge, firstly, that it's a key part of our economy that provides income and employment for people, then other things start to cascade down. And it's an interplay between the national policy. But I think the immediate steps are most realizable at the local level. So, the first is participating in the regulation of the cities. Your example of the informal traders in Cape Town. Are traders being consulted by the municipalities when the municipalities make decisions that affect them? That's key. We've got to speak to and allow spaces for informal traders to participate in the policy making that affects them. And then I think the second one, which is key, is the provision of infrastructure. So as I mentioned, if you're trading out on the street, it's harsh, you're exposed to the elements, providing safe places for traders to trade that are where they want to trade. So one of the things we see is that cities sometimes build informal trading markets, but they put them way out of the way of where all the pedestrian traffic is. No one wants to go out of their way. You want to be accessible in the transport hubs, near the work hubs. So providing infrastructure, safe places to trade, safe places to lock your goods, and then, essential sanitation services, clean water, access to toilets, that kind of thing. So, it's both it spans across from macroeconomic policy, acknowledging the role that this is a sector in the economy, and then all the way down to, what can cities or local municipalities do. And there are some excellent examples of municipalities that are being proactive in supporting the informal traders. So it certainly can be done.
Dr. David Francis, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Cool, thanks for having me.
Dr. David Francis, who joined us right here on this Friday afternoon. He's a senior researcher at the Southern Centre for Inequality Studies at Wits University.
This podcast is brought to you by Radio 786.